I want to start here plainly without softening it. I was wrong about Patrick Rourke in admitting that matters more than defending an old opinion. Because when new information comes out, especially information that changes how harm looks, the responsible thing is not to double down. It's to stop, reassess, and ask harder questions, even if that means revisiting someone you once believed cared. That's where this begins. Not with outrage, not with gossip, with accountability. For a long time, I believed Patrick genuinely cared about Timmy Whittaker. I believed the relationship was rooted in affection, not exploitation. I believed that whatever flaws Patrick had, his connection to Timmy was real. I don't believe that anymore. And here's why. Let's remove names for a second. Pretend this isn't Patrick. Pretend it's someone you know. Call him John Doe. John Doe starts hanging around your child. Your child is disabled. Not a child in age, but a child in vulnerability. Someone who cannot always express discomfort, fear, or consent clearly. John Doe takes your child places. John Doe films it. John Doe uploads it. The audience reacts however they want. Some laugh. Some find it endearing. Some donate money. Some mock. Some feel entertained. Now stop and ask yourself something honestly. Is the filming for the child, or is the child for the filming? Because that distinction is everything. Timmy is 46 years old, but let's not lie to ourselves about what that means. He is not a typical 46-year-old man. He is nonverbal, cognitively impaired, dependent. He cannot always communicate distress. He cannot negotiate boundaries. He cannot protect himself from being turned into content. So when people say, Timmy knew what was going on, I need you to pause. Did he? Or did he trust the person who controlled the situation? Because those are not the same thing. Some of you have argued that Timmy understood more than Betty, that he knew exactly what he was agreeing to. That argument collapses the moment you remember that understanding a moment is not the same as understanding consequences. Consent is not smiling on camera. Consent is not compliance. Consent is understanding, and Timmy cannot legally give it. Let's talk about the water incident. When Patrick sprayed Timmy with water, not lightly, not playfully, but with force, ask yourself something you would ask if this were your own disabled family member. Would you be okay with that? Would you accept that as harmless fun if your child could not clearly say stop? And before anyone says, Timmy laughed, understand this. Laughter is not consent. Nervous laughter, conditioned compliance, or learned performance are not proof of comfort. They are proof of adaptation. Now let's talk about patterns. Because character doesn't reveal itself in one moment. It reveals itself in repetition. When Patrick wanted something from people, attention, money, loyalty, his tone was soft, charming, grateful, engaging. When people stopped giving him what he wanted, we know how he responded. Some of you learned this directly. When you questioned him, when you pushed back, when you asked for clarity, his language turned sharp, insulting, degrading. One of his favorite words begins with a C and ends with a T. That matters, because how someone treats you when you no longer benefit them tells you more than how they treat you when you do. That's not love. That's leverage. I've argued with people I love. I've fought with people I care about deeply. But there are lines you don't cross when love is real. You don't weaponize someone's past. You don't humiliate them. You don't exploit their vulnerability, even when you're angry. Because when you truly care about someone, the goal is not to hurt them, even in conflict. That line matters here. Now let's talk about money, because money is where this stops being complicated. Patrick said he was going to pay the Whittakers' debts. He didn't. Instead, other people paid those debts after Patrick had promised he would. Then Patrick borrowed money from supporters, money he never intended to pay back. And where did some of that money go? Not to the Whittakers, to him. This isn't speculation. This is pattern. And here's the question nobody wants to ask out loud. If you truly love someone in need and you have access to money, why do you keep finding reasons not to help them directly while continuing to profit from their image? Here's an example that makes this simple. If you have $100 million and someone needs $1,000, giving them that money changes their world. For you, it changes nothing. You don't feel it. You don't miss it. You don't sacrifice. So when Patrick offered Betty a couch to sleep on, or even his bed, after everything that had already happened, what was he really offering? After profiting from the family? After promises broken? After money diverted? That's not generosity. That's optics. And now we have to confront something uncomfortable. Patrick didn't just show up as a stranger. There are reports, and now corroboration, that he had a history with a family that wasn't kind, that he threw rocks, that he bullied them before money entered the picture. So how does someone go from bullying to benefactor? Follow the money. Once Timmy became content, Timmy became access. Once Timmy became access, Timmy became income. Patrick took Timmy to places Patrick wanted to go. And if Timmy came along, Patrick could film it. If he could film it, he could monetize it. If he could monetize it, he could fund himself. That's not friendship. That's use. And yes, I've seen the messages. I've seen how people were spoken to once the mask slipped. I've now heard from at least 9 women, and more since the arrest, who described the same pattern. Charm when needed. Cruelty when challenged. Control when questioned. Patterns don't lie. People do. I take responsibility for being wrong. And I'm saying it clearly now. Patrick Rourke was not a good man to Timmy. Charming? Yes. Entertaining? Maybe. But love does not look like this. At what point does help become use? This is where the conversation gets uncomfortable, because it forces us to stop pretending exploitation always looks cruel. Sometimes it looks friendly. Sometimes it looks fun. Sometimes it looks like bonding. And sometimes it looks like a brand. The moment Timmy stopped being a person in a private family and became a recurring character online, something fundamental changed. Not emotionally, structurally. Because once someone becomes content, their dignity is no longer the organizing principle. Engagement is. Let's talk about that shift. When people hear the phrase Timmy time, many think of it as harmless. A nickname, a series, a moment of joy in an otherwise hard life. But branding is never neutral. The moment a human being becomes a named segment, a repeatable format, a recognizable hook, the incentive changes. The question stops being, what does this person need today, and becomes, what will people watch today? And when the person at the center of that content is nonverbal, cognitively impaired, and dependent, the risk multiplies. Because Timmy cannot renegotiate his role. He cannot say, I don't want to be filmed today. He cannot say, that made me uncomfortable. He cannot say, I don't want to be seen like this. What he can do is comply. And compliance is not consent. Here's the test I want you to run. Not with Patrick's name, not with Timmy's name, but with your own life. If someone you loved was disabled and another adult began filming them regularly, posting it publicly, and earning money or attention from it, what questions would you ask first? You wouldn't ask, do people like it? You'd ask, who controls the camera? Who controls the edit? Who controls the money? Who decides what gets posted? Who benefits when engagement spikes? Because control is where exploitation hides. Now let's address the argument that keeps coming up. But Timmy enjoyed it. That statement is emotionally persuasive and legally meaningless. Enjoyment does not equal understanding. Enjoyment does not equal informed agreement. Enjoyment does not equal consent. Children enjoy candy. That doesn't mean they understand nutrition. Patients may enjoy attention. That doesn't mean they understand consequences. And Timmy is legally treated closer to those categories than to an independent adult. Not as an insult, but as a recognition of reality. So the standard is higher. It has to be. The water incident is not about water. It's about power. When Patrick sprayed Timmy with water at force, the question isn't whether Timmy laughed, flinched, or smiled. The question is this: would Timmy have been allowed to say no and have that no respected? Because if the answer is unclear, then the act is no longer harmless. It becomes a performance imposed on someone who cannot meaningfully refuse. That's the line. Now let's talk about money again, because money doesn't lie. Patrick said he was going to pay the Whittakers' debts. He didn't. Instead, others paid them after being told Patrick would handle it. That matters because promises are part of trust building. When you promise care and don't deliver, but still benefit from the image of being a caretaker, that's not failure. That's misrepresentation. Then there's the borrowing. Patrick borrowed money from supporters. Money that, according to multiple accounts, he never intended to pay back. And the justification was always the same shape: helping the family. But when you look at where the money went, it didn't consistently land with the family. It landed with him. This is where the illusion breaks. Because love does not route help through yourself when direct help is possible. Love does not insert itself as a middleman unless control is part of the benefit. Think about this practically. If Patrick had access to people willing to donate, he could have set up transparent systems, direct payments to utility companies, receipts posted publicly, third-party oversight, no personal control of funds. That would have protected everyone. But that's not what happened. Instead, money flowed through him. And wherever money flows, power follows. Now let's talk about the argument that Patrick gave things to the family. Offering Betty a couch, offering a bed, offering temporary comfort, after profiting from their image, after failing to deliver on promises. After others paid debts, he said he would cover. That's not generosity. That's optics management. And optics are essential when your income depends on appearing benevolent. There's another detail people gloss over. Patrick didn't just take Timmy places. He took Timmy to places Patrick wanted to go. If Timmy came along, Patrick could film. If Patrick could film, he could monetize. If he could monetize, the trip paid for itself. And suddenly, Timmy isn't the beneficiary of the experience. He's the justification for it. That's not companionship. That's utility. Now, let's address the defenders, because this part matters. There are women who still support Patrick, even after the arrest, even after the patterns, even after the stories coming out. Some are sending commissary money. Some are defending him harder now than before. That doesn't prove loyalty. It proves attachment. An attachment to someone who devalues you when you're no longer useful is not love. It's dependency. And the hardest truth here is this: people who exploit others often cultivate defenders who feel chosen, until they're not. I want to be clear about something. People are allowed to redeem themselves. I've said that consistently. But redemption requires truth. It requires accountability. It requires acknowledgement of harm, not excuses, not deflection, not charm. Patrick didn't tell the truth. He said he paid the family. He didn't. He said he would help. He delayed. He said he cared. His actions contradicted it. That's not redemption. That's image management. So when I say I was wrong about Patrick, I don't say it lightly. I say it because the pattern is now clear. And patterns matter more than isolated moments. Charming people can still be dangerous. Funny people can still exploit. People who look like helpers can still use. And Timmy paid the price for that confusion. In part 3, we're going to talk about something even harder. Why exploitation often requires 2 roles, not one. Why one person alone rarely pulls this off. And why separating Patrick from Eric Carroll is not as simple as people want it to be. Because harm doesn't happen in isolation. At what point does filming cross the line from sharing to exploitation? Intention money, or consent. This is where the conversation has to grow up. Because exploitation at this scale almost never happens because of one person acting alone. It happens because roles form. One person becomes the face. Another becomes the connector. Another becomes the shield. Another becomes the amplifier. And once those roles lock in, harm doesn't need constant intent. It runs on momentum. That's why separating Patrick Rourke from Eric Carroll, as if one is the problem and the other is irrelevant, doesn't actually explain what happened to Timmy Whittaker. It oversimplifies a system. So let's break the system down. The myth of the lone villain. People want one bad guy because it's emotionally satisfying. You point, you condemn, you move on. But real-world exploitation, especially involving vulnerable adults, almost always requires at least two functions. The exploiter, the person who directly benefits. The enabler, the person who creates access, legitimacy, or insulation. Sometimes those roles overlap. Often they don't. And when they don't, the harm is harder to see. Role 1, the face. Patrick was the face. He was on camera. He was visible. He was charismatic. He was the one audiences interacted with. That matters because visibility attracts scrutiny, but it also attracts sympathy. People defend what they recognize. Patrick's role was relational. He made people feel connected. He made them feel like they were part of something good. That's powerful. But visibility also means Patrick couldn't operate alone. Faces need infrastructure. Role 2, the connector. This is where Eric Carroll enters the picture. Not as a verdict, not as a charge, as a role. The connector is the person who manages access, moves between worlds, translates situations, smooths friction, creates distance between the vulnerable and outsiders. The connector doesn't need to be on camera constantly. In fact, the connector is most effective when they aren't, because distance creates deniability. Why connectors matter more than people think. If Patrick was filming Timmy, someone had to enable that access, normalize it, keep family concerns from stopping it, keep the system from stepping in too early. That doesn't require malicious intent. It requires position. Connectors often see themselves as helpers, mediators, problem solvers. But when boundaries are weak, mediation becomes control. And when control becomes routine, no one stops to ask who authorized it. The two-person pattern. Here's the pattern that shows up again and again in exploitation cases. One person monetizes. Another person manages the environment that allows monetization to continue. One without the other struggles. Together, the system works. That's why focusing on Patrick alone doesn't explain how Timmy's life became content. And focusing on Eric alone doesn't explain where the money went. It's the interaction that matters. The comfort of delegation. Here's something uncomfortable but important. Families under stress often accept help that comes with conditions they don't fully understand. When someone says, "I'll handle it. I've got this. Don't worry, I'll deal with them," that can feel like relief. Especially when you're overwhelmed, you're poor, you're isolated, your family member is disabled. Attention is overwhelming. Delegation feels like support, until you realize you've delegated authority. And once authority is delegated informally, it's almost impossible to pull back. How Timmy got trapped in the middle. Timmy was never positioned to protect himself in this system. He couldn't negotiate filming, understand monetization, control schedules, object to being taken places, refuse participation safely. So the system formed around him. People made decisions about him. People spoke for him. People earned through him. And when a nonverbal adult becomes the center of a system like that, the risk is not theoretical. It's guaranteed. The illusion of, but someone had to do something. This is the defense that keeps surfacing. If Patrick didn't help, who would? If Eric didn't step in, what would happen? The family needed someone. That argument assumes only two options: exploitation, abandonment. That's a false binary. There were other options: documented guardianship, third-party oversight, transparent fundraising, agency involvement without intermediaries, boundaries around filming. Those options don't feel heroic. They feel boring, which is why they're often ignored. When helping becomes indispensable. One of the most dangerous moments in any caregiving situation is when a helper becomes indispensable. When people say, "We couldn't do this without him. He's the only one who understands. Everything falls apart if he leaves." That's not stability. That's dependency. And dependency is the soil exploitation grows in. The emotional shield. Here's another role that often goes unnoticed. The emotional shield. This is the narrative that says, he means well. He's flawed but good. He's trying. That shield doesn't come from facts. It comes from feelings. And feelings are powerful enough to delay intervention, especially when the person behind the shield is charismatic. Why accountability feels like betrayal. For some supporters, questioning Patrick or Eric feels like betrayal because they didn't just support a person. They supported a story where they were helpers too, where their donations mattered, where they were part of something good. When that story cracks, people defend it, even against evidence. Not because they're bad, because losing the story hurts. The overlap that can't be ignored. Here's the part people keep avoiding. Even if Patrick exploited Timmy directly, even if Eric believed he was helping, even if intentions differed, the outcome still matters. Timmy was used. Money flowed. Consent was absent. Control increased. Family lost access. A vulnerable adult became a product. Systems are judged by outcomes, not intentions. Why this isn't about picking sides. This isn't about saying, Patrick bad, Eric good, or Eric bad, Patrick worse. That framing misses the point. The point is this. No system that turns a disabled adult into monetized content without legal consent can be considered ethical, regardless of who played which role. That's the line. The hardest truth. Timmy didn't consent. The family didn't consent. The system filled the gap with assumption. An assumption is where harm lives. If Patrick was wrong, and many now accept that, why are some people still defending the structure that allowed it to happen? Because that answer explains why this keeps happening, not just here but everywhere. Is exploitation about bad people or bad systems that reward the wrong behavior? This is the part people don't like because it turns the mirror around. By now, a lot of people are willing to say they were wrong about Patrick Rourke. They see the pattern. They see the money. They see how Timmy Whittaker was turned into content. But here's the contradiction that keeps the damage alive. Many of those same people still defend the structure that made it possible. They'll say, Patrick was bad, but the rest was necessary. Eric was just trying to help. Someone had to manage things. Without them, the family would have had nothing. And that's where the real problem is. Because exploitation doesn't survive on one person's character. It survives on systems people are emotionally invested in protecting. Why people defend the system, not the person. Once someone admits Patrick caused harm, defending him directly becomes difficult. So the defense shifts. It becomes abstract. People stop defending Patrick and start defending the situation, the intentions, the need, the reality on the ground. This feels reasonable. It sounds mature, but it quietly preserves the same power structure. Because if the structure was necessary, then no one else has to be accountable. The emotional investment trap. Here's the hard truth most supporters don't want to face. Defending the system is often about defending your own role in it. If you donated, shared videos, defended decisions, argued with critics, trusted intermediaries. Then acknowledging systemic exploitation doesn't just indict the people running it. It forces you to confront this thought. I may have helped sustain harm. That's not easy to sit with. So instead, the mind looks for a softer landing. They tried. It was complicated. Nobody else stepped up. At least Timmy got experiences. That's not analysis. That's self-protection. Someone had to do something. The most dangerous sentence. This sentence shows up in almost every exploitation case. Someone had to do something. It sounds compassionate. It sounds practical. But it hides a fatal assumption. That unstructured action is better than structured action. In reality, when vulnerable adults are involved, the opposite is often true. Doing something without consent, authority, and oversight is not neutral. It creates dependency, control, blurred roles, financial leverage, silenced families. And once those exist, backing out becomes harder than stepping in. Why Eric Carroll still sits at the center of this question. This is where Eric Carroll can't be separated from the structure, regardless of intent. Because if Patrick was the face, Eric was part of the framework that allowed the face to operate. That doesn't mean Eric masterminded exploitation. It doesn't mean he committed a crime. But it does mean this question cannot be avoided. Who benefited from Patrick's continued access to Timmy, and who enabled that access to continue even when red flags appeared? When people say, "I still don't think Eric is guilty," they're often answering the wrong question. Guilt is legal. Responsibility is structural. And structure doesn't require malice to cause harm. The role of gatekeepers who don't look like villains. Most people imagine gatekeepers as obvious abusers. That's not how it works. Real gatekeepers often look like helpers, translators, advocates, protectors, intermediaries. They answer messages. They calm donors. They explain away concerns. They manage access. And because they appear reasonable, their authority goes unchallenged until something breaks. Why Timmy's voice never entered the equation. This is the part that should stop all debate. Timmy never consented. Not legally. Not meaningfully. Not reversibly. Every defense of the structure dances around this fact. People say, he liked it. He was smiling. He seemed happy. But no one explains how he could refuse, how he could withdraw, how his participation could stop without consequences. If the answer is he couldn't, then the system failed him. No amount of good intention fixes that. The better-than-nothing fallacy. Another common defense. Even if it wasn't perfect, it was better than nothing. This is a dangerous lie. For vulnerable adults, nothing is often safer than uncontrolled access. Nothing means no filming, no monetization, no dependency, no manipulation, no middlemen. Nothing gives space for proper help to arrive. Unregulated, something blocks that path. Because once a system is in place, outsiders hesitate to intervene. They assume someone is already handling it. Why the arrest changed everything, even for non-defendants. Once Patrick was arrested, the system's tolerance collapsed. Not because of public opinion, because law enforcement recognized a familiar pattern. Incapacitated individuals, monetized sympathy, blurred authority, donation pipelines, intermediaries. That pattern doesn't require everyone involved to be criminal. It only requires enough ambiguity to justify tightening control, which is exactly what happened. The cost of defending the old structure. Every time someone says, but without them, the family would have fallen apart, they ignore the reality that the family fell apart with them involved. Separation happened. Control shifted. Timmy was removed. Consent vanished. Money flowed away from the family. Those outcomes didn't happen in a vacuum. They happened inside the defended structure. Why this keeps repeating everywhere. This story isn't unique. It happens whenever vulnerability meets attention. Attention meets money. Money meets unregulated helpers. People rush in. Boundaries collapse. Systems form. Exploitation follows. And defenders emerge, not of the harm, but of the process. Because admitting the process was flawed threatens too many identities at once. The only honest way to look at this. You don't have to believe Eric Carroll intended harm. You don't have to believe Patrick planned everything from day one. But you do have to accept this. A system that allowed Timmy to be filmed, monetized, moved, and separated without lawful consent was broken, regardless of who thought they were helping. That's not an accusation. That's a conclusion based on outcomes. Was Patrick bad? It's why are people still protecting the conditions that let him succeed? Because until that question is answered honestly, this won't be the last Timmy. In part 5, we're going to close this by answering one final thing. What would real help have looked like? And what must never be allowed to look like help again? That's the only way this ends without repeating itself. Is defending intentions enough? Or should outcomes always decide? This is where we stop circling personalities and finally land the plane. Because if this ends with Patrick was bad and nothing else changes, then nothing was learned. And Timmy Whittaker deserved more than a lesson learned too late. So let's answer the only question that actually prevents this from happening again. What would real help have looked like? And what should never be mistaken for help again? Not emotionally, practically, structurally. What real help looks like, even when it's uncomfortable. Real help starts boring. Not exciting. Not viral. Not cinematic. Boring. Because when a vulnerable adult is involved, safety comes from systems, not saviors. Real help would have begun with legal clarity. Before filming. Before fundraising. Before trips. Before content. Someone would have asked, who has guardianship authority? Who can legally consent? Who can say no? Who is accountable if something goes wrong? If those answers weren't clear, everything should have stopped right there. Not delayed. Not figured out later. Stopped. Real help does not require a camera. This matters more than people want to admit. If help requires filming to justify itself, it is already compromised. Real help happens without witnesses, survives without applause, continues even when no one is watching. The moment filming becomes necessary for help to exist, the incentive has shifted from content, from dignity engagement. That shift is irreversible once it happens. Real help separates money from access. This is one of the clearest lines. Real help does not route money through one person. Ever. It uses third-party oversight, direct bill payments, transparent accounting, receipts anyone can audit. Because money is power, and power concentrated around a vulnerable person is always dangerous, even when intentions are good. If someone says, I'll handle the money, that's not help. That's control waiting to happen. Real help protects family bonds, not replaces them. One of the most damaging things that happened in this situation was family displacement. Real help strengthens families. It doesn't sideline them. It doesn't speak over them. It doesn't decide they're inconvenient. Even when families are poor. Even when families are chaotic. Even when families are imperfect. Unless a court says otherwise, family involvement is a safeguard, not an obstacle. When a helper becomes the primary voice and the family becomes background noise, the situation is already unsafe. Real help never makes someone indispensable. This is a critical test. If everything falls apart without one person, that person has too much power. Real help builds redundancy. Multiple caregivers. Shared responsibility. Documented roles. Clear exits. So that if one person leaves, nothing collapses. When someone becomes the only one who understands, the system has failed. That's not devotion. That's dependency. Real help accepts oversight without offense. People who are truly helping don't fear oversight. They welcome it. Because oversight protects the vulnerable, protects the helper, prevents misunderstandings, stops rumors before they grow. When someone resists oversight, frames it as mistrust, or treats questions as attacks, that's a warning sign. Not of guilt, of misplaced ownership. What must never be confused for help again. Now, let's be blunt. Here is what must never again be defended as help. Filming a disabled adult for engagement. Turning vulnerability into a recurring segment. Routing donations through personal accounts. Promising aid and delivering excuses. Speaking for someone who cannot speak. Removing someone from family without lawful consent. Calling control protection after the fact. None of that becomes okay because someone is charming. None of it becomes okay because people donated. None of it becomes okay because something had to be done. Why this isn't about punishment. Some people hear all of this and think it's about revenge or cancellation. It's not. It's about standards. Because if the standard remains, intentions matter more than outcomes, then exploitation will keep finding cover. If the standard becomes outcomes decide, regardless of intention, then fewer people get hurt. That's the choice. The final, unavoidable truth. You don't have to believe Eric Carroll intended harm. You don't have to believe Patrick Rourke started with bad intentions. But you do have to accept this. Timmy was used. Consent was absent. Money flowed away from the family. Control replaced care. And those outcomes define the situation more than any explanation offered afterward. Why admitting this matters? Admitting this doesn't make you a bad person if you once supported them. It makes you honest. Most people who end up enabling harm didn't wake up wanting to do that. They wanted to help. They wanted to matter. They wanted to believe in something good. That desire isn't shameful. But refusing to reevaluate once evidence appears is. What Timmy actually needed. Timmy didn't need a brand. He didn't need an audience. He didn't need experiences filmed for strangers. He needed protection without performance, care without monetization, stability without strings, dignity without conditions. That's it. And anything that interferes with those needs, no matter how polished, is not help. Where this leaves us. So this is where the story ends, not with anger, but with clarity. Patrick wasn't a hero. The system wasn't necessary. The structure was harmful, and defending it only guarantees repetition. The only way this means anything is if the standard changes. If next time, people stop earlier. Ask harder questions. Demand paperwork. Reject content-first compassion. Because vulnerable people don't get second chances the way narratives do. What should matter more, intentions or outcomes? Thank you for watching this video. Click here to watch another video that might interest you.